Well, good morning, everybody. This is Richard Chaplin, and today is Friday, the 1st of July, first day of the second half of the year, as it happens. And we are in episode 76. And the really exciting news for me today is a bit like long lost soul, Francesca Lagerberg, who some of you have seen on the show for many, many times, but got an amazing new job, 6 months garden leave. And she said to me yesterday, the one thing I kind of regret about the garden leave was I couldn't come on the show. So today is very special because we're going to welcome her back. So what are we going to be talking about today? Well, it's a diversity day, I think, is probably my feeling. We've got Fiona Hathorn, we've got Rachel Holmes. Sadly, Andrew Manning can't be with us. Something else came up, but he says he will be back to be with us in the autumn show, which is awesome. We're talking about thinking, because at the end of the day, if you don't think about things first, then you're unlikely to get there. So what are we going to be talking about today? Let's come back to me. I think really the kind of theme is that we're looking at what I call priority for leadership teams. And what's quite interesting at the moment is there's a lot of respected business surveys, CBI, IOD, and they're showing a fairly marked decline in confidence over the last few months. And it'll be interesting. We run our quarterly tracker today, so it'll be really interesting to see if that same is reflected with when you guys complete this shortly. So what's going on? Well, on the other hand, of course, there's a little bit less uncertainty regarding COVID. I had it a month ago. Others have had it as well, I think. So I think now we're in a situation where almost strategy comes into the fore. In other words, that you can't just sort of say, oh no, future's too uncertain, can't do anything, whoops. But you can actually think about what can you actually start planning for. So welcome to Rachel Holmes. Rachel is the Chief Executive of Matrix Chambers. And I could ask her to talk about how you run a group of sole traders, which is quite interesting in its own right. But I thought, let's do something a little bit different. And let's talk about her career in the sense that she'll explain in a bit more depth, had a very senior marketing role and then took a career break, if you like. And then she came back and she's now in her second barrister's chambers, which is probably a recipe for most people, one step too far, but I'm sure we'll hear a bit more in a minute. So welcome, Rachel. Welcome to the show for the first time. Our second presenter, just switch, is Fiona Hathorn. Now, Fiona is the co-founder and CEO of Women on Boards, which is doing it, I think I worked out, it's the 10th year anniversary this year, which is amazing. And she says that she and Women on Boards, I'm sure she hasn't done it all personally, has actually helped 1,800 women into board roles, whether from internal promotions or from then NED roles, which is really amazing. So congratulations on that. And I've asked her to talk today about taking boardroom diversity seriously. Which again is a word I picked up from a quote she gave around a really interesting survey that she put out a couple of weeks ago. So again, she'll probably talk us about, are people being serious about diversity? So that's our second panelist for today. Our third panelist, well, actually, I should say our regular, et voila, here she comes, Francesca Lagerberg, and no longer working for another accountancy firm, but now the global CEO of Baker Tilly International, London-based. It's interesting how many of the international accountancy network groups are actually based in London. Some I know and sort of across maybe in Amsterdam, but it's very much something that I think the Brits are very, very good at. And in a funny way, I of course, think the way that something like Baker Tilly International works and the way the managing partners form are quite similar in a way. You have members. The difference is that they all trade under the same brand, whereas I'm happy for you all to use your own brands. So there you go. Anyway, enough of that one, and welcome back. So let's move on. So I will go back to me. So what are we going to do today? Well, let's first of all just run through a little bit of forum news. If you're not watching the videos from past shows, you're missing out. And there are literally, I think, coming up for 300 now. And I don't think we're going to win the awards. It'd be nice, but I don't think that's really what it's all about. But the distilled wisdom from some amazing people, getting on for 200 people have now been on guests. So that's fantastic. And as long as I have an audience, and I have a great one today, which is good, just check, then we're going to keep going. And why not? I always say that life is about health, wealth, and happiness. And the only thing that probably really should get in the way is health. The other two you can cope with on the whole. Mental Match, that's been running. That's a new one to Francesca, I suspect, but we launched that one in February. It's going really well. We're up to about, I think, 50 mentorships that's already been created. which is quite a good number. And it isn't just about doing some matching, which I have an amazing algorithm that does that. It's actually then providing a place where they can actually work together throughout the mentoring relationship all the way through to the end, where you have an Uber style. I haven't got one yet. We haven't been running 6 months, but soon we'll get one where how was that mentor? How was that mentee? And then that feeding back into the initial assessment. And sort of sadly, but these things happen. This is the penultimate episode of the show before the summer break. So we'll be back in 2 weeks' time, hopefully with a less of a croaky throat. But I had my birthday party yesterday, which was lovely. And all the people on today were there, which was awesome. But I think I was talking to so many people, it was quite loud that I'm just not used to loud parties. So I woke up this morning with half a throat, but there you go. I will, I'm sure, survive. One does. So what are we going to do now? Well, I just really wanted to kind of take us into the next sort of section of the show. And we're talking about, in this case, feedback from UK government around poll results. And I had this great quote, oh gosh, maybe a year or so back, but I thought, oh, it's nice, I'll keep it, it's good. So feedback from UK government, your poll results are incredibly valuable in our analysis in these dynamic times. So no pressure on you guys, but just to make the point that in completing the poll, which we're about to do now, you are actually helping government as well as the forum, as well as members in general. So before we go into this week's poll, let's look back quickly at what were the key messages that came from the one we ran 2 weeks ago. And this was, if you recall, to do with marketing and new workflow. I know there's a number of people who come on the show every week or every fortnight. So, and again, I don't know whether this is good or bad. It's just more of a sort of a benchmark. About 15%, perhaps a bit more of new work has to come from new clients at around half the firms who completed it. That's quite a big ask on the whole. Much easier to get new work from existing clients, but new clients is always a tough one. But given you will lose some clients every year, you have to be doing that in order just to be able to grow the firm at all. In terms of the impact of hybrid working on winning new work, interesting, the area that came through as being the toughest was new UK clients. Then you had the non-UK clients, whether existing or new, and actually existing UK clients were hardly affected at all. This is like the impact. And what was quite interesting, you'll see, if you see the actual infographic, you'll see this, but when people were thinking about it 18 months ago, because we rerun that one, as I mentioned at the top, in November 2020, they were slightly more worried about existing UK clients than was the case, but perhaps not as worried about the UK clients. Anyway, have a look at that when you have a minute. You've got the link. We looked then at what were the marketing and BD experts up to. And again, this will be no surprise to most people. When you ask people, what do they currently have a major role in, as opposed to what do you think they should have a major role in, there were a number of areas where people felt that their marketing teams could and should be adding greater value. And this wasn't necessarily a question of not having the skills. I think it was often much anything else. They just weren't seen as being the people to invite in at certain firms. So sourcing new clients, acting as a change agent, a strategy role, if you like. Pricing strategies, and as we all know, if your costs are ricketing up as they are at the moment, your pricing becomes quite important if you want to keep PEP at the same level. And then making direct approaches to clients. That's something I think a lot of partners feel a bit nervous about, but actually at the end of the day, clients are typically very much open to all sorts of conversations with people from the same firm. And as all the research tells us, the more relationships you have with you and your client, the less likely you are to lose them as a client. So don't exclude those important relationships as well. In terms of marketing expenditure and headcount, we look back at the pre-pandemic 2019. That's up compared with pre-2019 at 80% in terms of money, 50% in terms of headcount. That's quite interesting because if we recall back to April 2020, thereabout, people were shedding marketing positions, and it was a concern that I know revenues are going to go down 30% or something. But actually what then happened was they've now been scrambling to hire them back again. Of course, what's happening, red hot market, salaries going up really, really fast. So, you reap what you sow, I suppose, in some ways. Looking at next year's marketing budgets, yep, they're going to be up again. It's about 60% of firms. None of the firms completing this survey 2 weeks ago thought they were going to be reducing their marketing budgets. So I think that's quite interesting. I'll just throw a few slides. You probably can't see this very clearly, but just to say that the impact of people working from home, hybrid world, if you like, is highest for the, let's get this right, highest for the new UK clients, which is the green one. So if you add the extreme impact at the top, and then the significant impact, 20%, modest impact, 60%, 80% are saying that it's tougher, and then the others will sew through. So it's quite busy, that one. So I'll probably move on. Which are the areas where they should be? And again, this is kind of an obvious link: pitch support, CRM systems, coaching frontline advisors, marcoms, sourcing new clients, pretty much as I read out. What does the headcount look like? And again, over to the right is an increase. And again, as I mentioned, the red is the survey we did in 2020. The blue is this year, 2022, 2 weeks ago. And kind of what I would say is that there's a shift to the right with blue. In other words, that's the increase. So the headcount is definitely increasing. And you get the same pattern with the expenditure, quite frankly. In terms of marketing budgets, to the left is reduction, to the right is increase, 40% about the same, 60% increasing. So quite interesting feedback. Thanks a lot for completing it. Hope you're up for completing this one. And what we're going to be asking you to do today, this is our quarterly sector trends tracker. So I'm really looking forward to hearing the results, because as I said, a number of the what I call monthly staples, CBI, IOD, etc., have shown quite interesting trends over the past few months. So what's this one all about? Well, this really looks at a number of areas that we found are really quite helpful to sort of take the temperature, if you like, at firms. So what are the issues being discussed at partner director meetings? What are the business priorities, the management activities, and the barriers to optimal performance? What are the projected activity levels, the projected headcount, and the new workflow over the next year? The extent of home working and office space requirements, again, over the next year, and some key metrics for successful firms. So what are we seeing here? This is we haven't done this for 3 months, so it's quite exciting. The areas which are coming through strongly as the ones which are key areas for partner director meeting discussions, if you like, are well, what's looking fairly strongly: people and money. That's nothing new, I don't think. Yeah. No, those are the ones, and then probably coming up third is marketing. So I don't think too many changes there. What about the management activities which will contribute most to helping your firm achieve its goals? And these are mostly about people, so it's communicating effectively. That's 93% of you. Making change happen, 64. Getting the best from your team, 57. Understanding and motivating others, coming through as well. So very much people-based, which I suppose is where people-based businesses, it's not that surprising. Whereabouts, what's the one that's coming through strongest? It's interesting, unless is that maybe I hope I didn't bias the results. Develop a clear purpose and strategy, 64%. And I know that was fascinating. That was actually going back 2-3 years ago, before pandemic, that was always the number one in the sector. And then we actually, at one point, I think that dropped away to nothing, and it all became about, business models and let's change the business. And now that, well, government's pumped money in and clients have been willing to pay and lots of work around, that problem has been supply chain as usual. How do you find the people? So developing a clear purpose and strategy comes through quite strongly. And a little bit behind that are increasing operational efficiency. So those are the two things, or those are the top priorities for firms. What about constraints? What's getting in the way? Again, I mentioned employee turnover, fee pressures. I think it's interesting. I remember you may remember this, Francesca, that sort of in the middle of the pandemic, there was 0 people included employee turnover in their top 3 constraints. And now it's up there at first equal with fee pressures. So there you go. Poor economic outlooks coming in at 50%. Now that fell away about 6-9 months ago. Economic outlook was improving. That's reviving a bit. So there you go. Do you expect to expand or contract? This is fascinating. Well, 64% expansion, 21% no change, 14 modest contraction. I know that is less than it was 3 months ago. I think it was up into the 80% then. So there's a reduction, but it's not a massive reduction, to be honest. So what else are we saying? Let's move on. Flow of new work, pretty much the same situation applies there. Headcount, yeah, pretty much the same numbers. Modest expansion, 50%, plus a few significant, 57. So again, about in the same place. Office space requirements, nobody's really doing for more space, about the same, half of you, and then about half saying less space. So that looks like a permanent change, but I think we kind of knew that anyway. How much time are people likely to be working from home? Around half of the time from home. Again, We sort of saw the numbers upping and downing a bit during the pandemic, but that seems to have settled at around about that sort of number, with a sort of kind of about a 2/3 in the middle, and then a third, around 3/4 at home, and then around a quarter of the time at home for the other 20%. So kind of a nice, easy distribution. And then we go through the statements, which are always interesting. Our leaders share strategic ops in the business, 57%. Our employees are valued just as highly as other stakeholders, 64%. Paying is shared distributively. It was at one stage, not anymore. Our leaders are accessible, 80%, transparent, 50%. Dominant management style is challenge and support. That's fallen away. Interesting what you think of the management style to be, hopefully not command and control. Remote working has increased productivity. About 30% of you are saying that, and I know I've seen higher percentages before. And this is always an interesting one. Our key clients are on track for post-COVID success. That's about 30% of you think that, but we're on track for post-COVID success, 50%. Now there's a mismatch there, isn't there, I guess, because if your clients aren't on track for post-COVID success, where's the work going to come from? So I'll stop sharing now. And thank you all hugely for completing that poll. It will be, as I said, share with government. And I'm now going to invite Rachel, if she is able to join me. Awesome. So I would now like to invite Rachel to actually come and talk to us about careers. And what does that mean? Over to you.
Thank you, Richard, very much. Thanks to everyone for today. So I'm going to talk about returning to a leadership role after a career break, which is something that I did. I'll talk briefly about my story and then lead into some of the ways that I think that you might be able to manage yourself or offer support to your teams if anybody there wants to take a career break. I worked my way up over a period of about 10 years to a leadership position where I was marketing director with a global education company. I absolutely loved my job. I was thriving. I had one baby. I had a second one on the way. All was great. And in the middle of my second pregnancy, I nearly lost the baby and I was hospitalized for a short while. And it caused me to have a reset. And that was in parallel to the fact that I'd also put my hand up to have a promotion at work. And the job had gone to a colleague of mine who also had a toddler and whose wife also had a baby on the way. He got the job. I didn't. It may have been that he was very, very talented and I was less so, or it may have been that I'd hit the glass ceiling at that point. So my moment of reflection was, actually, I don't want to keep battling here when the most important thing to me at the moment is making sure I have a healthy baby. So after my period of maternity leave, I chose not to go back to work. I thought I was going to take a career break of about a year, reset. It ended up being, for me, almost a decade. So I was out for a very long time, having got myself to a leadership position that I was loving. So what are my tips for coming back into the world of work? Because that's something that I managed to do. And I know that others can do it too. And I want to make sure that happens. So first off, know it's okay to take time out. Don't judge yourself harshly if this is something you choose to do. And certainly don't listen to anybody else who might be judging you poorly for it. Know also that it can be incredibly positive to take time away from the world of work. When I came back with real enthusiasm, an absolutely new lease of life, total energy, wanting to conquer the world in my career. I'll also add that hopefully working life is a long life for all of us now. I think we're likely to be working longer than the generation above us. It could be a 50-year or more career that we're in, and a few years out in the middle of that really is neither here nor there. So give yourself a break. Don't assume that while you've been away that you haven't actually been learning. All the skills that I built up as a full-time mother were ones that I'm afraid to say I use on a daily basis here, dealing with colleagues and clients and just life. Prioritizing my workload, working when I'm absolutely exhausted, juggling, multitasking, all of these skills, which perhaps one doesn't recognize out of the context of work, were ones that I was learning and building on when I was away from the workplace. And similarly, if you're taking a sabbatical simply to tend your garden for 6 months and regroup, don't underestimate the brain power that's coming to you by that moment of peace that you're having, and how that will feed you when you come back to work. Yes, the world of work is very likely to have moved on while you've been away, but it is possible to keep your hand in. What I ended up doing was becoming a governor of a local school. I became a trustee of a local charity, and both of those kept my board experience going. I also did voluntary work with local teenagers who are on the autistic spectrum, and I will add to any of those of you who work with highly functioning, very, very bright sole traders. You'll know that working with troublesome teenagers can be helpful. So I see that although the world of work had moved on, I also had some skill sets that I could bring to it. Make sure when you come back that you get yourself trained up quickly. IT had gone through a transformation in the time that I was away, and I really was at sea when I came back. And it took me a little while to realise that I needed proper training. But once I got that in place, it was all plain sailing. It could be that your internal comms system has moved from email to Slack to Teams to something else while you've been away. Just get yourself on top of whatever's going on internally. Ask for the training and don't be shy about asking for it. If you work for yourself, make sure that you're investing in yourself. One of the things I also did was that I set myself up to begin an MBA because I really felt that I'd been out for quite a long time and I needed to get right back up there. That was really, really challenging to do an MBA alongside coming back into a leadership role, alongside working full time with 3 kids, all of that, but not impossible, and actually far more stimulating than negative to be doing that at that time. Yes, a return. Am I nearly there? Thank you, Richard. I see I've got 3 more points. Yes, the return to work was terrifying, but don't underestimate that your skill sets remain in place if you're a leader. And remember, there's no stupid questions when you come back. Ask the stupid questions. Everyone will be grateful that you do. I'm going to jump ahead. My last point is you took a career break because you wanted to look after yourself and experience something new, or give back in some way. That doesn't stop because you come back. Make sure you retain those things in your continuing career. I hope that's a whistle-stop tour. I hope that, thank you for the prompt, Richard. I hope there's something in there that we can all take for ourselves or give back to our colleagues. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Rachel. That was really, I mean, I know you and I have spoken about that, but I think there are so many things that you've clearly done through that transition which tick the box that all the people who know about it say you should be thinking about. So it now gives me great pleasure to introduce Fiona Hathorn, who is the co-founder of Women on Boards. And Fiona is going to be talking to us today about taking boardroom diversity seriously. Over to you, Fiona.
Well, thank you, Richard, but I can't help but relate to some of the things that Rachel was talking about. So thank you for sharing that with us, Rachel. I too took a career break of about 5 years. And the one thing I never have, and you'd have to meet my father to understand this, is misunderstood my skill set or confidence levels. But regardless of that, when I tried to get back into the city, having had a 5-year break, other people underestimated my skill set because they assumed I'd been doing nothing. I'd actually been doing angel investment. I'd actually been closing down a $2.5 billion hedge fund, which was my husband's hedge fund at the time, which was one of the reasons I'd taken a career break, to do that on his behalf because he had burnout. But it was very, very difficult because when I was moving back into the fund management side, I'd previously been the global head of desk. And therefore I was going into lower positions thinking I've been out of the markets for a little bit, but I couldn't get a job. And the reason I couldn't get a job is because I was probably too good for those lower jobs, but I wasn't accepted into the top jobs. But therein lies another opportunity, because that's what resulted in me launching Women on Boards. And Richard, thank you very much for your introduction. I must update our numbers on the website because we've actually helped about 3,500 people into the boardroom, 10% of which have been men. Because I absolutely believe the point that Rachel meant about being on boards, external boards, really can develop you as a leader and you as an individual. So certainly if you take a career break, it's a great thing to do. But I think it's also a great thing to do alongside your day job. Particularly interestingly, if you're in the legal profession. Because you've mentioned about being sole traders, we've got billable hours, you've got clients, but it can be quite a flat structure. And actually getting up into the leadership and really understanding how difficult it is to lead people or understand risk, HR, operations, and all the things that you do as a leader over and above dealing with your clients. And the sort of billable hours side of the legal profession, and there are other aspects to it as well, but it's the same in other professional services. It's really, really good. And if you go engage with your community at a leadership level, it's a bit like taking a mini MBA. Assuming you choose the right board. And therein lies one of the other questions, because when you're in the boardroom, people worry about not knowing enough about governance on universities or NHS or sports boards, all of the public appointments boards. It's not difficult. Most people learn on the job. Boards actually only do two things: performance, strategy and stargazing and oversight with regard to what the executive team are doing, and conformance, which is filing your accounts and abiding by the law. And that's one of the things we as an organisation do, is plant seeds. And I hope I'm planting seeds today. There's a board position out there for everyone. You're never too male, you're never too old, you're never too young to be in the boardroom, because the boardroom matters. But of course, when you get into the boardroom, and there's a lot of pressure on boards and also professional services firms to get diverse leadership teams. Diversity is absolutely brilliant, but only if you can manage it. Are you able to consciously include people? Are you able to like take collective collegiate decisions? And it can be very, very difficult. And that brings me on to leadership and leadership matters. You know, interesting your survey, Richard, talking about more organisation, thinking what's the purpose of our organisation? Thinking how do we lead people in different environments? And the leadership, because we work with so many corporates, men as well as women, in our organisation, talking about meeting matters, influence matters, the boardroom matters. And if you thought about how you actively manage your career, a lot of companies are struggling with leadership and how to be consciously inclusive. And I think it's really, really important how consciously inclusive you are if you're leading virtual teams. And I think the professional service, I would say law firms are slightly behind. The accountancy firms find it really, really difficult not to see individuals and work with individuals who've got different priorities in life. And I think the investment that's required in making people consciously inclusive, and I'm not talking about unconscious bias training, you know, give us all a break. If I hear people say, I'm not biased, I know they are biased, because we are all biased. It is within our DNA to do that. And therefore, even I have to stop myself and consciously think in a room or in a meeting, how do I make sure that person's spoken? Have a radar on what's going on in the room, and it's difficult. Now, one of the things that my organisation does is research as well. So we've just launched a report called The Hidden Truth, where we've looked at what's been happening on the diversity of boards outside the top 350. There's a huge spotlight on the 100. Lord Davis started that 10 years ago. Then we've had Hampton Alexander, they've extended to the 350, and it's now called the FTSE Women Leaders. And they've moved their focus from the boards, because whip-de-dee, we've met the target of 33%, and the target is now 40%. That's actually not difficult. It's not many companies. But outside, and if you just look at the 600 companies in the FTSE All Share, 44% are not meeting the target. If you look at their executive leadership teams below, it's really, really interesting. It's in terms of what I would describe as real companies, the executive teams are less than 20%. If you, Hannah, make one more point. If you have a female chief executive, the leadership team is 55% women, 45% men. If you have a male CEO in that group outside the FTSE 350, the female leadership is only 14%. Now, are women promoting like themselves, or are they having a different view of what a leader could look like? But that number is extraordinarily different. Is it statistically significant? For those statisticians out there, no, because there aren't that many female chief execs. However, it's every single board. So leadership matters, and I'm here to support and help anybody get into the boardroom if they're interested, because it matters. And it's not for everyone. I just want you to be conscious that I'm not doing it for a reason and know about it. So thank you again, Richard, for bringing me here today. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Fiona, for congratulations on what you've achieved over the last decade. It's quite awesome, I think. And now I have the pleasure, of course, of introducing, guess what, a female chief executive. Congratulations to Francesca, and it's over to you.
Wonderful, Richard. What a joy. What a joy to be back, actually. So thank you for inviting me back after what's been a couple of months break, really. But it is a real pleasure. And it's lovely to see that there's some long-serving listeners as well who keep tuning in and love what you do, Richard. And a special happy birthday from me. 70 years young this week, and it was a joy to see you for the very first time yesterday. We've known each other a long time, but never actually met. How weird is that? So what a pleasure. So maybe I could just pick up onto the two core themes that have come through today, if that's all right, as we move into the panel session. I'm going to start with career breaks because I never had one. And I really wish I had. I feel a little bit jealous because I think there's such a lot that people learnt and get from that. And many of my friends and many of my colleagues have done that for a variety of different reasons, men and women. And I think there's something incredibly powerful about what someone brings back into the workforce once they've had a little bit of a break. And having just had a little bit, tiny bit of a break over the last couple of months, I can just see how restorative it is, but also how it opens your mind up. You can get very lost in the weeds in any role that you do. And I think it's sometimes incredibly helpful to have a bit of time to step back, to look at what really matters and to see what it is that you really want to do, as well as what you bring. So from a very personal perspective, having had a short gap between the role I left and the role I'm now very, very fortunate to be doing, I just know how important it's been to have time to reflect and think, and also how much I wanted to come back to work. Wasn't quite sure if I would, but how much I wanted it a lot. So I think there's something powerful about knowing that you're doing something that you really love. But also to the point that Fiona was making, which I think is, and also Rachel explained so well, was that it's not that you lose skills during that time, you just gain different skills. And that ability to bring a different variety of things back into the workforce is phenomenal. I've worked with a lot of women who have taken career breaks for their children and have come back with a very different approach, outlook, incredibly efficient, because they have that ability to always run a military operation because of what they're having to do in their life, and have come back and been absolutely fantastic in the roles that they've gone on to do. And I do really think organisations that promote people coming back into the workforce set a really good example about recognising that. Going to the boards, I must pick up on the boards matter, which Fiona, this is, yeah, I totally agree. Although sometimes I think you can look at boards and you go, gosh, really, that looks quite deadly. Why would anybody want to be part of that dull sounding range of governance meetings? What a living death that must be. But it's not, is it? And I think the real power of bringing independent thinking people into organisational boards is so important. Again, it brings fresh eyes, fresh thinking into boards where perhaps they haven't got a huge pool of upcoming talent, and it encourages them to move in that direction. Or they've become a bit of an echo chamber and they all absolutely rabidly agree with each other, and bringing in a different mindset. I think it's a very helpful thing for boards, but also it's just so important that boards have a diversity of all kinds on them, because otherwise, as we know, you're less commercially effective. Lots of really good research around that, but you're also likely to miss some things because you're a little bit too narrow and a little bit too focused. And I think it's just one of the most powerful things that happened over recent years. There's a recognition that diversity of thinking is not just a very common sense and normal and quite practical thing to do, but also hugely commercially valuable. So last one for me, Richard, before we go into the full panel, is I think there's something that people really do still wonder why, with all the noise around diversity, equality, inclusion, so little has really happened. And I think an awful lot of that stems from the fact that it's quite easy to set up a program, quite easy to have an initiative, quite easy to slap a logo onto something and think that that's going to solve the problem. It absolutely doesn't. You have to take really determined action. And like execution on anything strategic, you have to be quite boring about it. You just have to keep doing it and doing it and doing it until a difference happens. It doesn't happen overnight, but oh my goodness, it will not happen if all you do is set up a program and think that's going to solve everything. And I think that's the most important thing we could learn, is that unless you got the tone from the top, rigorously pursuing it in a meaningful, embedded way, nothing's going to change. And that's not fair on anybody, least of all fair on the organisations that are missing a trick by not being more open. So that's all for me, Richard, for this moment, but looking forward to the questions.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much. And yeah, it was lovely to meet you for the first time. I think you were rushing off to a concert, so it was shorter than you'd hoped, but we had a quick glass of champagne and that was wonderful. Rachel, just really wanted to sort of talk to you for a second around, just picking up perhaps the last point, around tone and the tone that the leader needs to bring. I'm fortunate that both Francesca and you are chief executives, and going back to what Fiona was saying, that's well, we're obviously got a very statistically, what shall I say, unusual mix here, which is all good. Affirmative action, you could call it, if you like.
I think a very good mix of panel here. I'm a big fan, Richard.
I'm using my words with great care here. But I was just really asking Rachel about tone and the tone of the leader. And I mean, you had a marketing background. Marketing, you have a leadership role in marketing, but it's not the same as being the chief exec. And a lot of marketing people I know aspire to be the chief exec or Wales to that effect. So a little bit, how do you set the tone, and how does that sort of blend what you were doing before with what you're doing now? Be really interesting to hear.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I think the tone is everything, and I've learned, and I think this might sound crass now, but just to be authentic with your tone. I've learned the value of recognizing that we're all just human. We're all just ordinary people. Those of us doing some of our roles are doing quite extraordinary jobs, I think, but we're ordinary people in them, and everybody in our organizations are people who want to be having full, enjoyable, stimulating lives. And I think perhaps personally, what I'm able to do is to be really authentic when I'm talking right across the organization, because I've got the lived experience of being someone who's been juggling a toddler and a baby in a supermarket aisle. I've also now having the lived experience of looking after very elderly, very infirm parents. I've got the other side of it, and I've got a staff team with every single and a cohort of barristers, every single possible thing you could imagine that could go on in a life going on, because that's the nature of all of our organizations. So tone, when we talk about that, I just think it needs to be very, very authentic, very clear, very human, and very embracing. I'm, and talking about how we are a great panel here. Yeah, we are a wonderful panel, but we don't have diversity of colour here. We're only four people, so perhaps not. But I see that as increasingly being something that I'm just going to put this isn't maybe part of your question, but it's something that I'm increasingly interested in and championing, and really want to make change happen on this one. And I think that comes from, I think you said it, Francesca, perhaps even being a little bit boring about it, but just keep talking about it. And that's why I'm just was putting that in here. We need to keep talking about the full range of diversity.
Fantastic. And Fiona, as the expert, I suspect, in the area of diversity and talking about the range of diversity, I mean, to me, there's always kind of a contrast between diversity, which could argue be accentuating differences, and inclusion, which is all about bringing people together around a common goal. So how do you see this sort of moving forward in a board context?
I think, diversity is all forms of diversity, ethnicity, socioeconomic, cognitive diversity. So I think the only reason we talk about women, and I'm as bored as that subject as anybody else, is because if we can see the data on women very, very clearly, and if you're not getting your women right, you're probably not getting anything else right. I think that's the only thing it tells you. And working at it. Rachel is absolutely right. If the chief exec or the leadership team or the chief exec is not able to get the leadership team on board, nothing happens. And I meet all sorts of organisations right across the spectrum of sectors, and I can assure you I meet too many D&I heads who are tasked with this, to deal with this, who don't have the influence, power and support. And then worse, this is a hot subject area, and therefore they're rightly moving career and jumping around. So I'm meeting a different person, starting again. And that's just telling you you're not really talking from the top. So it is important. I want to pick up on what Francesca was saying about governance and being boring. She's absolutely right. It can be excruciatingly boring. And so one of the things that we specialize is understanding you, what you understand, what you've got to offer. And I think particularly in professional services where there's conflicts of interest ongoing on paid boards, is understand what you're passionate and care about, because you'll cope with the boring governance side. Also understand you. I love startups. You know, I've been on FTSE listed boards, albeit investment trust boards, I will admit, and they're not actually always for me. Unless the people are right. I've been involved in really large school governing boards where it was just, they weren't ready for change, and I'm a change agent. So therefore I couldn't cope with the governance side of it, because what else was happening was doing my head in. So again, understanding you, and I think being passionate and learning is great. But yes, leadership matters, but the board cannot control and is not running the company. It's noses in and fingers out. But the board will know and can see and can do something about it if they can see the executive team is not getting involved. And the Financial Conduct Authority, which is really leading the way because of financial services where there's a particular issue, is asking people to make one of the board members responsible for D&I. And please don't just assume that the woman will understand it. Just if David, Fred and Bob understand it, why will Jenny necessarily understand it? If you're black or you're an ethnic minority, do you understand it? So I think there is a skill in understanding it, and let's not all put it on one person's shoulders. Everyone collectively needs to be responsible for it, and you're really choosing it to be a committee head. And then you're devolving power and money and resources, because it takes time. And Francesca's right. You just have to keep going on it, and people are rather tired and rather bored of the subject, which is rather worrying.
Fantastic. Now, I was going to really sort of perhaps now ask Francesca a question, which was talk about the word change agent. To what extent do you see yourself as a change agent?
Oh, that's an interesting one, Richard. Gosh, I think it'd be kind of disappointing if you weren't wanting to be a change agent if you're sitting in a C-suite role, because that's part of the job, I feel. But I think it's for other people to judge whether I'm only good at being a change agent. That's certainly not for me to call. But I think in the professional services sector, which of course is where I live, there is such a need for change. There's a need for change around how we work, the way we work, how we deal with the outside world, how we manage ourselves internally so that we reflect that back, and how we change the way that we treat our people. I'm just going to mention one tiny aspect of it, Richard, because it's such a big question. There's a whole program on that, I reckon, somewhere. If in the war for talent, which is probably the thing that's on most people's minds, how do you bring in great people? How do you keep great people? How do you inspire great people to be even better? What's going to be the most interesting to them? I don't think great talent wants to join an organization that's static and doesn't want to improve. What's the excitement in that? In my wildly unscientific last few days, I was sitting around the table with my 3 children, all of whom are in their 20s, all of whom are either in their first job or, please God, about to go into their first job, because that would be very, very nice. And all of them were talking about the kinds of organizations they've been looking at, the kinds of organizations they've actually just gone, not really interested, because they do look as though they're not facing the modern world with at least an aspiration to get better. So I think all leadership teams are it should be change agents, because if you're not trying to make what you've got better, if you're not trying to leave a better legacy than the one you've been given, why are you there? What are you doing? So absolutely think it's important that all C-suites embrace change.
Yeah, I was going to say, and perhaps picking up what something Fiona was saying around, sometimes I think there was an expression, a contrarian board member. In other words, somebody who is come in to ask the difficult questions. And of course, all that happens, and I think you and I've talked about this in the past, is they get isolated, which is why I know you've always said you'd have more than one women on board, that one isn't sufficient. Well, I was going to ask Rachel another question, really following up around, and just more interesting around being authentic. And it's a point that you made about being an authentic leader. And there's some very interesting research which Mini Ibarra of London Business School has come up with, looking at the whole notion of how do you, as they said in another context, fake it to make it. In other words, how do you come across as authentic when you really don't feel very authentic because it's a new role and you're not necessarily quite sure what you should be doing next? We all have been in that space. So how have you overcome that particular challenge?
Oh, well, yeah, I'm glad you say that, because I nearly put that as my last point, which was, just remember, everyone, fake it till you make it. And I thought, I can't be saying that at this, here, but you've done it for me. I think, it's something it's advice that I've given to quite a lot of people along the way, men and women, but more so to women. I think there's something about, and I was absolutely delighted in Fiona's words, where she says she's never doubted herself at all, and quite right too. I don't think she should, and nor should any of us. But if we're going to go through that, because somehow we've been brought out to sort of, do that along the way, there's an awful lot to be said for putting on, putting on your armor. There's a reason why we put on a jacket and some lipstick, for example, in the morning, and set off to work feeling like I look the part, I'm going to try and be it today. And I don't mean to be quite as trite as that, but I think most of us who have walked into a difficult meeting, for example, or a difficult board meeting at this level even, and there are times when we just don't feel that we're kind of on our A game. You do have to give yourself a little talking to, and that sort of fake it till you make it kind of mantra. I think we still hold on to that. It's a big, deep breath. You can do this. And if you don't completely trust yourself that you can do it, just have a bit of a wing and a prayer and you'll get there. I know that sounds slightly trite, Richard, and I'm sorry to sort of be talking like this to us all, but I think that's the reality of our working worlds. There's an awful lot that all of us do, and that all of our staff teams do, and everybody in our organisation does, where they feel like they're a total expert. But there's just those moments when you just feel, I'm on the back foot and I haven't got a clue, and that's where you just got a big breath, have a go.
Yeah, and Fiona, just sort of picking that one up, I mean, to what extent do you think, and I'm sure women on boards do this, you can help people through that difficult situation through training, mentorship, or some other way of working together with somebody in a safe, confidential space?
Yeah, there's so many things I want to pick up on. Sitting around the table with your young children, your children in their 20s, starting their jobs, just to pick up on that. And then I will come to that question, Richard. You might have to remind me. I've got 2 boys. I want them to not pick on the concept of diversity in all the conversations they're having it, because I want them to understand it's about improving the organisation. It's really, really important, and them to be the good leaders that they need to be, and to love change. You're absolutely right. How do I cope as the stress is on my own? Because yes, I am confident, but I'm confident because my father taught me how to fake it till I make it, because I was mildly dyslexic and failing at school, but brilliant at maths, and he could see me dropping down. What else enabled me to be confident as a head of desk was because I had a fantastic chief exec who, when he saw me rushing home to relieve the nanny, and I was a very highly paid executive, and that's a different life than people who aren't highly paid and can't cover that cost. He told me to stop rushing around and leave at 4 o'clock. And I said, don't be ridiculous. My entire team, I've got in at 7, my entire team are here. I'm not rushing home at 4 o'clock. And he said, don't worry about what your team thinks. Worry about what we think of you above, and we think you're marvellous and we don't want you to go over. So that's the sort of thing that can help people raise their confidence levels. And for me, running women on boards, because we've got so many people, so many contracts, running a business, I didn't intend to do this. What helps me is having a great chair. I have a really supportive chair. So when I do have a wobble and I am tired and stressed, it really makes a difference. Now, Rich, I have forgotten your question and I'll be very brief in answering it, but I couldn't help myself. Sorry.
It's all good. I think we've actually sort of come to the point now where we'll have to defer that to your next appearance on the show, because we're now going to move to the gallery. And what I'd like each of you to do very quickly is just to start off with Francesca. What's the one thing that you've learned from today's session, Francesca? Just
oh
one
gosh,
thing.
just one. Well, I'm going to slightly reframe the fake it till you make it to think like a leader, and that helps you act like a leader.
Okay. Rachel, what's your takeaway from today?
Well, I'm ashamed of myself for not actually saying in that when I fake it till you make it, that you fake it, but actually you have support. And I've had the support of fabulous mentors and paid coaches and peer groups, and that's what supported me. So a bit of self-belief, but also that structure. And
the last word from Fiona?
Well, you know what I'm going to say. Consider board roles, be conscious, choose not to do it or do it. But I will just say one other thing. They've all mentioned being honest and showing your true self as a leader. And that's my one regret in life. I could have been a little bit more honest with my team at my struggles when I had young children, because I did look like Superwoman. And actually, if you poke me, I might have just burst into tears from time to time. So honesty and supporting people below is important. Thank you.
And that's a form of authenticity as well, I suspect, isn't it, in a way, isn't it? Anyway, fantastic panel. One more to come, 2 weeks' time. Got a great lineup. Francesca back as well, regular panelist, which is awesome. I'd like to thank Rachel for sharing in a very open way about some of the very interesting career path that you've followed, and Fiona for how you've reinvented yourself, and now that after 10 years maybe a whole new world will emerge in a totally different direction, because who knows, for Women on Board will probably become an institution, and probably is already, I suspect, but there you go. So leave you guys with that happy thought. Have a lovely I'm off for my birthday weekend now, but have a lovely time, all of you, and we will catch up. And I don't think I've lost a single person the whole of this session looking at the attendee numbers, so that's the best feedback I can give you. Have a lovely day.
And happy
Bye for now.
Thank you, Richard.
Happy birthday.
Take care, everyone.